Hello and welcome back to Jekyll and Hyde Annotate with an Examiner. We are now on chapter 9, part 2. So in part 1, Lanyon was telling us his narrative, and this is a continuation of Lanyon's narrative. He received a letter from Jekyll where he was given some instructions to collect some items from his room, from Jekyll's room, and then meet somebody at midnight, and that's where we finished. So just before we continue, you might want to go and grab your copy of the text, a highlighter, a pen, so that you can annotate along with me, as well as a notebook so that you can make a record of key quotations and use them in future assessments, exams, or for revision. And play when you're ready. Okay, so let's get started. 12 o'clock had scarce rung out over London, ere the knocker sounded very gently on the door. I went myself at the summons and found a small man crouching against the pillar of the portico. So a portico is an elegant doorway with columns. "Are you come from Dr. Jekyll?" I asked. He told me yes, by a constrained gesture, and when I had bidden him enter, he did not obey me without a searching backward glance into the darkness of the square. There was a policeman not far off, advancing with his bull's-eye open, and at the sight I thought my visitor started and made greater haste. These particulars struck me, I confess, disagreeably, and as I followed him into the bright light of the consulting room, I kept my hand ready on my weapon. Here at last I had a chance of clearly seeing him. I had never set eyes on him before, so much was certain. So we'll now find out that this visitor is Hyde, and we find out here that Lanyon has never met Hyde before. But these are the descriptions he offers about Hyde, which are very, very similar to the descriptions that we've received of Hyde before. He was small, as I have said. I was struck besides with the shocking expression of his face, with his remarkable combination of great muscular activity and great apparent debility of constitution, and last but not least, with the odd subjective disturbance caused by his neighbourhood. So the description of the figure, who we know is Hyde, also reveals some of the contradictions we have noticed in other characters. So this links to the duality of man. So there's the juxtaposing language here used with a remarkable combination of muscular activity, great apparent debility of constitution. This bore some resemblance to incipient rigour and was accompanied by a marked sinking of the pulse. So the description of this stranger, who we assume is Hyde, and obviously I've told you guys it's Hyde anyway, is very important because of his effects on Lanyon. So he creates a sinking in his pulse. At the time, I set it down to some idiosyncratic personal distaste and merely wondered at the acuteness of the symptoms. So remember, the effects that Hyde has on others is very important when analysing the character of Hyde. So if you were to get a question on Hyde specifically, then that's something that you definitely need to mention, and it's something that we've covered in previous videos as well. But I have since had reason to believe the cause to lie much deeper in the nature of man, and to turn on some nobler hinge than the principle of hatred. So Lanyon is at great pains to point out that this feeling has nothing to do with the appearance of the visitor, however unsettling that might be. He reflects that the cause of this personal disturbance lies not in any feelings of hatred, but is much deeper in the nature of man. Perhaps this figure has forced Lanyon to confront something within himself, something which he finds shocking and terrifying. So remember, Stevenson's message in this novella is that we can all relate to Hyde to some extent because we all have evil within us. So this is a question really for more the top end. So the students that are really aiming for the grades 8s and 9s. Do you think that Lanyon is forced to confront something within himself by seeing Hyde? And all of these characters, their hatred towards Hyde, is it because they're forced to confront the evil that's within themselves as well? The relatability of Hyde and the unease that this causes them. This person, who had thus, from the first moment of his entrance, struck in me what I can only describe as a disgustful curiosity, was dressed in a fashion that would have made an ordinary person laughable. His clothes, that is to say, although they were of rich and sober fabric, were enormously too large for him in every measurement. The trousers hanging on his legs and rolled up to keep them from the ground, the waist of the coat below his haunches, and the collar sprawling wide upon his shoulders. So Hyde is wearing really huge clothes that are clearly very, very big for him, which would usually make somebody laugh, but in this instance is quite eerie. Strange to relate, this ludicrous accoutrement was far from moving me to laughter. Rather, as there was something abnormal and misbegotten in the very essence of the creature that now faced me, something seizing, surprising and revolting. So you might want to make note of these quotations, this rule of three: seizing, surprising, and revolting. So seizing means something that keeps you at a halt, something that keeps you almost like a trapped prisoner, something that keeps you locked up. So this is the effect that Hyde has on him. Surprising, obviously, we all know what that means, and revolting means disgusting. So this rule of three really illuminates the type of character that people feel Hyde is. This fresh disparity seemed but to fit in with and to reinforce it, so that to my interest in the man's nature and character, there was added a curiosity as to his origin, his life, his fortune, and status in the world. So Lanyon is intrigued by what kind of reputation this man must have. Again, linking to the themes of reputation as well as hypocrisy, that everybody's just interested in somebody else's status or class and respectability in society. These observations, though they had taken so great a space to be set down in, were yet the work of a few seconds. My visitor was indeed on fire with sombre excitement. "Have you got it?" he cried. "Have you got it?" And so lively was his impatience that he even laid his hand upon my arm and sought to shake me. I put him back, conscious at his touch of a certain icy pang along my blood. "Come, sir," said I, "you forget that I have not yet the pleasure of your acquaintance. Be seated, if you please." And I showed him an example, and sat down myself in my customary seats, and with as fair an imitation of my ordinary manner to a patient, as the lateness of the hour, the nature of my preoccupations, and the horror I had of my visitor would suffer me to muster. So he's showing Hyde how to sit down, exactly the position in which to sit down. So it's either that he sees Hyde as not fully formed, not fully evolved. So remember the things that we've said about Darwinism and the concern that the Victorian readership had with Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. So you could argue that Lanyon sees Hyde as somebody who is primitive, somebody who hasn't evolved properly, and that's why he's showing him how to behave. Alternatively, he could just be thinking that Hyde is a madman and needs some direction and needs a bit of caution as well. "I beg your pardon, Dr. Lanyon," he replied civilly enough. "What you say is very well founded, and my impatience has shown its heels to my politeness. I come here at the instance of your colleague, Dr. Henry Jekyll, on a piece of business of some moment, and I understood." He paused and put his hand to his throat, and I could see, in spite of his collected manner, that he was wrestling against the approaches of the hysteria. I understood a draw, so he's thinking, again, the word hysteria links to madness, so he's thinking this person has lost his mind, has gone mad. But here I took pity on my visitor's suspense, and some perhaps on my own growing curiosity. "There it is, sir," said I, pointing to the drawer where it lay on the floor behind a table and still covered with the sheet. He sprang to it and then paused and laid his hand upon his heart. I could hear his teeth grate with the convulsive actions of his jaws, and his face was so ghastly to see that I grew alarmed both for his life and reason. So this creature is an exaggeration of the figure we first met in Enfield's account. He has become, so in chapter 1, the figure that we met there, he has become more animalistic, more convulsive and primal, more primal than ever. "Compose yourself," said I. He turned a dreadful smile. So you might want to make note of this quotation as well, dreadful smile. Lanyon responds with both pity and repulsion to this figure. The duality that was once between Jekyll and Hyde now shows itself in Hyde alone. It is symbolized by this phrase, dreadful smile. So the scowl of pleasure and evil at once shows how complex and indefinable the double identity has become. So this double identity is no longer seen when we compare and contrast Jekyll and Hyde. It's seen just within Hyde. We see this contrast of character and this duality of nature within Hyde. At this stage in the novella. He turned a dreadful smile to me, and as if with the decision of despair, plucked away the sheet. At sight of the contents, he uttered one loud sob of such immense relief that I sat petrified. And the next moment, in a voice that was already fairly well under control, "Have you a graduated glass?" he asked. I rose from my place with something of an effort and gave him what he asked. He thanked me with a smiling nod, measured out a few minims of the red tincture, and added one of the powders. The mixture, which was at first of a reddish hue, began in proportion as the crystals melted to brighten in colour, to effervesce audibly, and to throw off small fumes of vapour. Suddenly, and at the same moment, the ebullition ceased and the compound changed to a dark purple, which faded again more slowly to a watery green. My visitor, who had watched these metamorphoses with a keen eye, smiled, sat down with the glass upon the table, and then turned and looked upon me with an air of scrutiny. "And now," said he, "to settle what remains. Will you be wise? Will you be guided? Will you suffer me to take this glass in my hand and to go forth from your house without further parley? Or has the greed of curiosity too much command of you?" So notice this recurring word, curiosity. Why is this word so important within this chapter? Why the word curiosity? Why do you think? Please comment below if you've got any ideas as to why you think that this repetition of this particular word is used within this chapter. This is, and also there's a really eerie, mysterious, and almost ominous atmosphere created with this voice of Hyde asking these repetitive rhetorical questions. Think before you answer, for it shall be done as you decide. As you decide, you shall be left as you were before, and neither richer nor wiser, unless the sense of service rendered to a man in mortal distress may be counted as a kind of riches of the soul, or, if you shall so prefer to choose, a new province of knowledge and new avenues to fame and power shall be laid open to you, here, in this room, upon the instant, and your sight shall be blasted by a prodigy to stagger the unbelief of Satan. This is the moment of truth. This is the moment of truth for both Hyde and Lanyon. Lanyon's lifelong beliefs in reason and scientific truths are being threatened, and Hyde's nerves and frenzied action suggests that this experiment is about to make or break him too. Hyde's language, as he warns Lanyon, echoes Lanyon's criticism of Jekyll being unscientific and devilish. His mention of the devil forebodes that we are about to cross the boundary between science and the supernatural. So remember, there's also the battle between science and religion here within this novella. So we see this battle in play within this quotation. "Sir," said I, affecting a coolness that I was far from truly possessing, "you speak enigmas, and you will perhaps not wonder that I hear you with no very strong impression of belief. But I have gone too far in the way of inexplicable services to pause before I see the end." So note again how Hyde does not just himself seem evil, but he seems to inspire a kind of passionate hatred in others. "It is well," replied my visitor. "Lanyon, you remember your vows that follows is under the seal of our profession. And now, you who have so long been bound to the most narrow and material views, you who have denied the virtue of transcendental medicine, you who have derided your superiors, behold." He put the glass to his lips and drank at one gulp. A cry followed. He reeled, staggered, clutched at the table and held on, staring with injected eyes, gasping with open mouth. And as I looked, there came, I thought, a change. He seemed to swell. His face became suddenly black, and the features seemed to melt and alter. And the next moment I had sprung to my feet and leaped back against the wall, my arm raised to shield me from that prodigy, my mind submerged in terror. "Oh God!" I screamed, and "Oh God!" again and again, for there before me, eyes, pale and shaken and half fainting and groping before him with his hands like a man restored from death, there stood Henry Jekyll. So here is the long-awaited explanation for every traumatic turn of events. The characters have been so busy looking for rational, logical answers, trying to use their reason, that they have misjudged Jekyll's interest in mysticism and scientific experimentation. The truth is far more horrific than they suspected, because it is so unpredictable and so contrary to their rational beliefs. This is why Lanyon is so changed by what he sees. So remember, he changes drastically and he falls very, very ill out of shock from what he's seen. Another thing as well to consider is, as the modern reader, it's impossible for us to read this novel as an unsuspecting Victorian reader would have done. So, because today Jekyll's double identity is so well known to the modern reader, it is, however, easy to see that Stevenson intended to keep his readers in the dark for as long as possible, while challenging them to discover the truth for themselves by leaving a series of vital clues. So it's important here to notice how shocked the Victorian readership would have been by this revelation, because we're so used to hearing about Jekyll and Hyde and the connotations behind it, and we know that there are dual characters. But in the 19th century, people wouldn't have known this, wouldn't have suspected this. So all of these mysteries would have led up to this really shocking, troubling moment in the novella. What he told me in the next hour, I cannot bring my mind to set on paper. I saw what I saw, I heard what I heard, and my soul sickened at it. And yet now, when that sight has faded from my eyes, I ask myself if I believe it, and I cannot answer. My life is shaken to its roots. Sleep has left me. The deadliest terror slits by me at all hours of the day and night. I feel that my days are numbered, and that I must die, and yet I shall die incredulous. As for the moral turpitude that man unveiled to me, even with tears of penitence, I cannot, even in memory, dwell on it without a start of horror. I will say but one thing, Utterson, and that, if you can bring your mind to credit it, will be more than enough. The creature who crept into my house that night was, on Jekyll's own confession, known by the name of Hyde, and hunted for in every corner of the land as the murderer of Carew, Hasty Lanyon. So that's the end of chapter 9. If you have found this video useful, please remember to comment, like and subscribe. And in the next episode, we will be doing chapter 10. So I'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye.